Hi, I'm Rachel Ann Goodman, journalism instructor for Cabrillo College. And every semester, my students pick a different topic they'd like to share with you. Often we don't think of homelessness as an issue that students have to grapple with. But indeed, with our housing crisis escalating and the cost of rents in Santa Cruz County skyrocketing, homelessness has become more of an issue for students at Cabrillo College and UCSC. Here's Samantha Self, your moderator for this panel discussion.
Hello, I'm Sam, here with Sean, Elliot, Luis, Megan, and Jean. Today we'll be discussing homelessness, a growing crisis in Santa Cruz. The population of people that are homeless in Santa Cruz is rising. A 2017 census showed homelessness has increased by 14.5% since only 2015. Students, travelers, and citizens of all backgrounds are affected by the homeless crisis. Santa Cruz's new homeless camps and housing opportunities may be temporarily helpful, but is the county doing enough to solve the real issue behind homelessness? We'll be hearing students and experts on homelessness offer possible causes and solutions for people without a home. Sean, what do you think some of the causes are for homelessness in Santa Cruz?
I think what most of it comes back to is the rising inequality present in America, as well as the almost complete lack of a social safety net that we have now.
What about you, Elliot?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a couple things. I think it's bills adding up. I think it's it's having a corrosive environment around you. It's maybe losing your job at the last second, and then it's losing sight of those long-term goals, and then all of a sudden all your short-term goals just go away. So I think just without a bunch of easy solutions to those quick problems, it kind of puts you out.
Okay. And what about you, Luis?
I think it's just maybe in childhood, a lot of us grow up like very with limited resources. So once we go out of high school and become adults, we don't have the right tools, or we're not taught how to maybe go on in our life. And I feel like a lot of times we get distracted by other things, and we end up missing what we have to do, I guess.
Yeah. What about you, Megan? What do you think are some of the causes of homelessness?
I think part of the problem is having two colleges in our area. UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College brings a lot of young people in, and not everyone's fortunate enough to have the help of their parents or someone else to support them. So when you're living in such an expensive area on a student's budget, it can be really hard to make ends meet.
How about you, Jean?
Well, I agree with everything I've heard, but going back a bit to what Sean was saying, I think there's a feeling that there are us and there are the others. And I think until we begin to think that everyone, anywhere in the country, but certainly the people that are here in our county, in our city, are all of us, and we all have a responsibility for each other. And I think if we thought that way, as people do in many other countries, then we could find the specific solutions that are needed to resolve it.
So it did go out and talk to people about what they thought the causes of homelessness were and what we can do to help them. I think we should go to that video.
I work in a place where I have to deal with some homeless population where I have to kick a lot of people out, or people threaten me and stuff like that. But then there's also people that are super nice, that are just struggling to get by. So it's really hard. It's not as black and white as some people make it out to be.
So expensive around here, especially in the Santa Cruz area and Capitola area. We're not in a place that's very high on having people have housing that's affordable, as opposed to putting the rates down for housing. I wish that places were at least less expensive. So many homeless people around here, and around Watsonville, Monterey, Santa Cruz. It breaks my heart because I feel like so many people deserve homes, and it's just their circumstance that keeps them away from getting a home. I hope if there are students around here who are homeless, they find a place that they could stay, because it's important. Not only they're trying to, pay for school, pay for books, pay for courses, getting a house or an apartment isn't cheap, and it's not easy. So I hope the best for them.
I feel a little bit, not guilty, but just a little sad to see other people in those kinds of situations. And I'm not sure. It's just kind of difficult to know that there's so many people with so much money, like, the top 1%, and that millions are without homes out here.
When you think homeless, you assume like maybe like a drug problem or something. It bothers me when some people say like, oh, it's their own fault or something like that. And I know some people think that way, but for me, it's like, I feel like obviously none of them want to be homeless. Like, I feel like they deserve to be helped out and given a chance to at least get back on their feet or something, because obviously it's not a good place to be. I mean, I think homeless shelters are helpful with like places just to like sleep and stuff, but I don't know that they necessarily like put them back on their feet. Like, I think if we could have people, like whether they're like professionals or volunteers, to help like talk to these people one-on-one and actually give them like advice and opportunity to get a job.
A lot of people aren't helping the homeless. A lot of people just ignore it and just assume that it's their fault. There's a lot of people who are ignorant and think it's their fault. They need to figure it out. It's just a lot of people who aren't helping them out, and drugs, and they were born into it, so they don't know any better, and there's no one there to help pick them up, I guess. I have a coworker who's homeless. She works 2 jobs, and she lives in her car, and she recently got a new car, so she's excited, and it's like her new house. But yeah, she's homeless and she's struggling, but she's a good person, and yeah. And I feel like we're doing our part, at least as a community. I honestly don't know what more we can do, but I feel like we're doing a lot right now.
So the police have a lot of power over what goes on with homelessness in the county. What kind of policies do the police departments in the area have as far as how they choose to police homeless people, Jean?
Well, I talked to the police, and in fact, I wasn't able to get a hold of the official representative, so I spoke to a lieutenant who is out on the streets, and actually it was very interesting talking to him. He said, I asked him if there was a ban against sleeping on the street, sleeping in your car, sleeping in an RV, and he said, yes, there is an ordinance. But he said, we're not out looking for people to ticket. If we have a complaint, then we have to follow up on it, but we're not targeting them. And I said, well, where are people supposed to sleep? Because we know there aren't enough beds, there aren't enough shelters. And he said, if it's during the day, go to a park. But what about if it's at nighttime during those hours? He said, go someplace where we can't see you. And as long as nobody complains about it, then we're not going to ticket you, because we know that's not a solution. And he said, the police are caught in the middle. We can't solve the problems like mental health issues or addiction, and we know that ticketing and arrest is not a solution. So all we can do is respond to people's complaints, but we can't change the real problems. But he said we do have a lot more compassion than people think we do.
That's good. Has that changed from the previous police chief and how they were kind of dictated under that?
I wasn't here under the previous police chief, but it's my impression that yes, that there has been a change in policy, and this idea of not targeting people, not looking for people is something new. Because I did hear the police chief one time say himself, that's not a solution.
And I think it's clear that we need more homeless shelters. There was the National Guard Army in De La Vega Park that was very likely looking to be an overnight homeless shelter for a lot of people in Santa Cruz, and this month they said, actually, no, we're not doing that, even though it had been used previously for years and helped many homeless people. Luis, what are some of the pros and cons of homeless shelters?
I think some of the cons, obviously, is that you're surrounded by people who are also facing issues, like such as drug or mental issues. So it almost like enables them in a way, or you're surrounded by your peers that you're almost you when you're having like a problem with. So you kind of sometimes want to get away from that. And also it's they're overcrowded a lot of times, so there isn't enough resources or even beds. So it almost feels like you have to fight for a bed or survival, and it has a lot of people doing desperate things at times. And some pros obviously are that you have a bed, and that you might get a meal, and that you might not freeze to death, or you have some place to put your stuff, because obviously when you're facing homelessness, I feel like a lot of your items mean that much more because you have so little at times.
Yeah, to go off that, I think the positives are pretty obvious. You know, if it's a storm outside or if there's a riot outside, what have you, you got somewhere to go, you got a roof over your head. But it kind of instills a sense of false hope in a way, because you get somewhere safe and you feel like you've made it and you do it, but then you can only stay there for a limited amount of time, and then there's not a ton of pathways right after that people are helping you with to get through to the next levels of securing yourself a long-term home, or maybe, you know, getting a job or anything like that. So it's kind of tough. It's kind of both ways.
It is. It's hard for people to get a job when sometimes they can't work because of mental or physical disabilities that they have. You know, Sean, do you think there are any mental illness correlations to being homeless in Santa Cruz?
Absolutely, there is. You know, just to look at one statistic that I found, 20 to 25% of the homeless population across all of America is suffering from a serious mental illness, compared to only 6% of the total population. So clearly, people with serious mental disabilities and illnesses are way overrepresented within the homeless population. And I think what happens a lot is that people with mental illnesses end up homeless because of those illnesses, because they lose their job, they lose their housing, whatever. Maybe they get kicked out of their family's house, and then being homeless exacerbates that mental illness, which can possibly lead to substance abuse. And it's just a vicious cycle that feeds into itself over and over again, making it almost impossible, without some kind of outside help, without some kind of healthcare treatment, for them to make it off of the street.
Yeah, speaking of outside help, we interviewed Don Lane. He runs Smart Solutions, which is a great organization in Santa Cruz trying to help homeless people. I think we should cue that interview.
Your organization is called Smart Solutions to Homelessness. So what are some of these smart solutions to homelessness?
One which has now been widely adopted across the country is called permanent supportive housing. And that means when someone has been homeless for a long time, sometimes labeled chronically homeless, that they are placed directly into housing with sort of social supports, like a social worker, a case manager, to help them succeed in maintaining their housing. The Santa Cruz County recently got a grant from the federal government to do a youth homelessness project. So now we're creating some new programs that are designed by young people to meet their particular needs, and now those folks are participating in some of these processes. Again, it will include housing. It'll include some safe spaces that are just oriented to that age group.
What is maybe the size of the homeless population in this area compared to the amount of housing or campground sites that are legally available to them?
Roughly, I think right now the most recent numbers are in the 2,400 people experiencing homelessness. There are approximately depending on the time of year, 400 to 500 shelter beds or shelter spaces in the county. So in other words, we have this huge gap, that there are many hundreds of people who just don't have an option for shelter.
What do you think some of the possible root causes of Santa Cruz County's crisis might be?
The housing forces are a major cause. And some of the other pieces that are causes of homelessness are substance abuse and mental health problems. A third one that's really important to notice, and the state of California has really taken notice of this and is trying to work on it and making some progress, is the foster care system has been a huge feeder into homelessness. Like approximately a quarter of all foster youth experience homelessness after they turn 18.
Can you explain to me the term people experiencing homelessness as opposed to just homeless?
I think it kind of misleads people into like what homelessness is about, because the definition of homeless is not that you look kind of scruffy and carry your backpack around wandering the streets. the definition is you don't have a home. And that's what we should focus on, so we see all the different kinds of homelessness that there is, like students who are going to school, living in a car, invisible to most people. Those folks are homeless also. And there's just a whole variety of experiences around homelessness that we want to make sure we're including when we use our language, and so we use that term.
So Jean, you went to the Homeless Services Center this past weekend. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
They had an open house for the general public, and I was really glad I went. It's not like the shelters that you were talking about. It's a really nice atmosphere there. They have a special place for families, people with children. They have a playground for them. They feed them twice a day, really nutritious meals. But what impressed me most is their basic philosophy, which is housing first. What they say is other places you have to meet all kinds of requirements in order to get some kind of housing. But we feel that first you give people a stable, permanent as possible place to live, and then you can deal with mental health issues and you can deal with addiction issues. And in the campus, as they call it, where they have housing, unfortunately, only for about 200 people. And out on the streets, according to the, in Santa Cruz County, there's 2,249 people who are homeless. So 200 out of that is not that much. But they're working to create a pathway for everyone that they work with to stable, permanent housing. So it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a very good drop.
That's definitely good. There are improvements happening in Santa Cruz to help people are homeless. And Megan, what about students facing homelessness in Santa Cruz? Is there anything being done to help them?
Yeah, so that's a huge issue right now. So actually, when Sean and I were talking to Don Lane, he was explaining that a lot of students don't actually utilize the services available to them because it's not really marketed towards younger people. When you think of homeless assistance, you think of families, you think of veterans, you think of those with drug addiction and mental illness, but college students doesn't necessarily come up in your mind. So they're doing research on college students to find out what kind of services they would want, what kind of services they need, and how to better get this to us. But at the moment, there just isn't much being done. The typical things are food banks. I know some schools have gone kind of above and beyond. UCLA has a homeless shelter. Some schools will give like vouchers for hotels so they can have a temporary stay. But at the moment, there just isn't much for us available.
All right. And Jean, we also went to Food Not Bombs over these past 2 weeks. Did that change your outlook on homeless people in Santa Cruz because we worked one-on-one with them and spoke with them?
It was a really good thing to do, and I'd encourage everybody to volunteer if they can, because, yeah, I mean, I have a philosophy towards homeless people, but I hadn't actually met and spoken to a lot of homeless people, and I thought they were great. It really, yeah, it made me feel much more comfortable, and I came away with a better sense of, again, yeah, they're a part of the community, and we need to welcome them and do what we all need to do for each other's neighbors. So yeah, I recommend it to anyone who wants to go.
All right. We actually interviewed Keith from Food Not Bombs, who founded the whole foundation, and we gathered an interview, and I think we should cue that.
There's actually this really giant homeless population, much more so than what the media says. And sometimes I'll be like here in the beginning of the month. This didn't happen this month, but we'll get 6, 7 people come to me saying they've never been homeless, they don't know where to sleep, what to do, and it's not uncommon to having, and that never used to happen. For in Santa Cruz, the economic situation is crazy of the price of housing. But here is the kind of the problem. It's like I was used to speak at city council here in 88 and 89 when they first started arresting people in Santa Cruz for feeding people. And we would advocate that they build like single room occupancy hotels and things like that, because the homeless problem is going to get bigger and bigger if the last 8 years is any indication. And so they never did it. So it would be wise to have low-income housing all over America, evenly distributed, so that everybody could get housing. Also be good if wages were actually at a living wage. Many people living on the streets have jobs, but they can't possibly pay the deposit to move into an apartment. Make an environment where homeless and not homeless would all be eating together and hanging out. So therefore, one, it would, often homeless people are always going from soup kitchen to soup kitchen to this, and they're never really interacting with anybody but social services or the police and the jail. So, or the emergency room. And then so by having like this nice environment where people of all backgrounds are all hanging out, then the people that do have housing will go, wow, these are just regular people, it's okay if they put like a campground in my neighborhood, or if they they have low-income housing, that kind of thing. So that's, getting over that attitude that the homeless are just this very scary, dangerous group that's going to steal from us, and we don't want them in our backyard, is, that really has to stop. Because it's, otherwise, then those same people yell and scream and write letters saying, it's horrible, there's homeless people all over the streets, So really the thing is to have the consciousness of the American people say, the people living on our street are our brothers and sisters, the workers, the people that made the country, people that have disabilities, all the many reasons why people are on the streets, and therefore we want to fund the things that make sure that doesn't happen.
So Elliot, what solutions are people working on out there? Like Keith was mentioning, kind of getting rid of classism by bringing people that are homeless and not homeless together.
Right.
What else is happening?
So I know that they're trying to integrate more one-stop solutions or one-stop facilities where they have rehab, employment centers. They also have people working on case by case. So each person who comes into a place, instead of like we were saying before, where they come in and then have to leave after a few days, they come in and they go through a whole series of programs that actually lead them to the next step in each possible direction. So I think if we get some more of those, and then kind of like what Keith was saying, having more of a community feel, like if we're going to have a tent set up, a whole park full of tents with homeless people living there, just like we live somewhere else, we got to have more events kind of that keep us all on the same playing field. So like we all, some type of event that keeps us all feeling like we're all, just people living in a city.
I agree. I think there needs to be more one-on-one help with the homeless. Social worker, not they have to bring themselves to a facility and live with 20 other homeless people, and they have to figure it out. I think each person needs one-on-one help. Yeah. Sean, do you have any ideas for homelessness solutions in Santa Cruz?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we need is more health care available to people who maybe don't have the means and resources or the insurance to go and get that health care themselves. I think a big cause of this whole crisis goes back to the 80s, when all of the state mental hospitals were shut down and all those people were just thrown out on the streets. And I think a lot of those people who got kicked out then are the same people we're still seeing today on the street.
Yeah. What about you, Louise?
Solutions?
Solutions to homelessness in Santa Cruz. Do you think you have any ideas of what you would institute to help them?
I think just giving them or seeing them as human beings is just a perfect start. But I think some solutions might be even just going above and beyond and trying to help them, even if you're like strangers, because I feel like these are our neighbors and our family members, and it just it takes a lot of help, and we get help, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, it takes a village. How about you, Megan?
Yeah, something that we haven't really touched on, but it's important, is the foster care system. 27% of homeless people in Santa Cruz reported that they had been a part of the foster care system at one point. It almost seems like it's just a direct tunnel from the foster care system to living in homelessness.
Yes.
So there needs to be something to reform this system.
How about you, Jean?
I just wanted to mention one statistic which I got from the Homeless Services Center, because they said that it costs between $70,000 and $80,000 a year to the city to keep somebody homeless, meaning emergency services, jail, court fees. But to house them, it would cost between $17,000 and $22,000.
Right.
So it's actually much cheaper to have housing first and provide housing.
Wow,
Yeah, that's a really startling statistic.
that really is. And what do you guys feel when you see homeless people on the street? What about you, Sean?
I feel very sad that, in one of the richest and most advanced countries in the world, we have so many people who don't even have the basics for life. They don't have shelter and food and healthcare. It makes me kind of ashamed to be in this society right now.
Yeah, I feel privileged for sure every time. I mean, just having basic needs, whether you can be in a crappy situation, but once you get out of that, you have a place to go home, you have a meal to eat, you have a shower to take that you can take, you can go watch TV, whatever. These people, they live through that every single moment throughout the day. So it's like, it's tough, and you can't help, you can try to help all of them, but it's piece by piece for sure.
I feel a little bit more personally touched, I guess, because my brother dealt with the homeless as well, and he had a drug addiction as well. So even though he was sheltered in our home, that really changed my view on homeless, because these are people and these are someone's brother just like mine.
Alrighty. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in today and everyone who helped create today's show. We encourage you all to help rid Santa Cruz of the classism separating people on the streets from everyone else. We need to see homelessness decreasing, not increasing. With the help of the Santa Cruz County officials and citizens, we can get people into homes and off the streets. Mental illness, drugs, and the rising cost of living are all contributors to the homelessness. Let's do what we can to help. All right?